Well, hey everyone, welcome to this Navigating the Next Generation event. My name is Dave Walker. I'm the pastor of our high school community here at Willowdale Chapel's Kennet campus. I'm joined by my teammate, Jamie Lintner. She's the children's pastor at our Jennersville campus. You know, we're part of the Next Gen team here at the church, and we exist as a team to help nurture faith that lasts in the next generation. You know, our Navigating the Next Generation events give us a chance to have very focused conversations around specific topics that matter to our community. So tonight we're joined by a panel of professionals who, Jamie will introduce here in just a minute, and we're going to discuss depression and anxiety among the next generation. You know, we're going to be releasing this among other resources, you know, in upcoming weeks, and so we hope that this conversation and everything that comes out after this helps you walk with the next generation through depression and anxiety. So hand it over to Jamie.
All right. Yeah, as Dave said, welcome. I'm just going to take a moment to introduce our panelists. So I guess just it would be easiest as I say your name and introduce yourself, if maybe you can just give a wave so that folks kind of know where you are. But first, Sage Windemaker is a wife, a mother, and she is a licensed clinical social worker who's been supporting children and family in the fields of psychology and social work for over a decade. Bill Madison he attends Willowdale Chapel with his wife Sarah and their two children. Bill has been a school teacher and a middle school and high school counselor in the Delaware public school system for 28 years. Bonnie Kotler is a member of Willowdale Chapel. She's been married for 36 years, has 5 children, a son-in-law, and 2 daughter-in-laws, along with 5 grandchildren. Bonnie is a licensed professional counselor, both in Pennsylvania and in Delaware. And finally, Jim Conkle is an associate pastor here at Willowdale Chapel over at our Jennersville campus. He spends much of his time leading out with our Celebrate Recovery ministry at Willowdale. Jim is married. He has 4 children, 2 son-in-laws, and a baby grandson. Thanks for being here, you guys.
Yeah, thanks everyone so much for being part of this. I know that each of you have served our community both directly and also in a few indirect manners as well. And as we were preparing for this conversation here, we actually reached out to our community at the church and asked them, you know, what questions they might have for you guys. And so we've interjected some of those throughout this conversation. But I wanted to start out by speaking and really directing this question specifically to Bill and to Sage. So in what ways have you seen 2020 impact children, children and teens, their mental and emotional health? Bill, I'd love to hear from you first. How have you seen 2020 impact children and teens and their mental and emotional health?
Sure. So the biggest thing that kids are struggling and adults are struggling with is getting back to some kind of normalcy in their life. Before COVID hits, pretty much everyone had a routine. You get up, you go to school, you do your homework, you hang out with your friends, and that routine has gone by the wayside. So kids' sleeping cycles, the routine has just totally changed, and some kids are really having that tough time getting back into some normalcy because things are differently. And the biggest thing is to teaching kids that this is a temporary situation. I think a lot of people thought that this would be over by now, but it's not. But it is temporary. It's something that is going to go away. But we just have to, do the right thing and just stick it out.
And Sage, for you, I mean, you spend a lot of time counseling children and teens. I mean, how have you seen this impact them?
Yeah, so, I'll echo that I definitely have seen that, kids and teens, they're carrying a lot of additional stressors during this time, and I would say both consciously and subconsciously. So things such as, worries about, for some kids, health implications related to COVID. I do have a handful of children that I've worked with that are, their worries are really centered around, what if I get sick? What if somebody I love gets sick? Also frustrations and difficulties just that accompany the new way of doing school, possibly feeling isolated from people that matter, grandparents, great-grandparents, feeling the stress and the uncertainty that I think often overflows out of the containers of most of the adults around them is something that I've also noticed. And, you know, I think these worries and the additional pressure and stress and uncertainty, it impacts every child and adolescent differently. But some of the effects that I've noticed collectively is that they may begin to feel more disconnected, you know, maybe feeling like a stronger urge to bury themselves in video games or social media, or other areas of the digital world kind of as a means to numb out a little bit or mute or pause the reality of our current circumstances. I've also seen that the heightened amount of worry has caused some kids to kind of cycle through more intense and frequent worry patterns. So sometimes kind of landing them on more obsessive tendencies or rumination patterns. And, you know, I've also seen quite a few kids take on more of a caregiving role, you know, so they see the adults in their world worrying or kind of carrying the impact of new stressors and burdens. And so I've seen a lot of kids and teens that feel like they need to kind of step up and take on a new role because of that.
Wow. That's, I mean, we know that this is, like, we've all seen that this is exhausting. We've seen it be exhausting for adults, certainly, but, you know, just to kind of hear you both touch on, you know, kind of stepping out of rhythm and to see them kind of begin to pacify themselves, certainly is a bit overwhelming and upsetting, but I know that even as an adult, sometimes that can be a struggle. You know, Jim and Bonnie, you guys have the chance to interact with, you know, children, especially on an emotional level, in a couple of unique spaces. So Jim, it would be great to hear you speak a little bit to the parents on this. Like, what can parents do to positively support the emotional health of their children?
Yeah, I mean, for me, so much revolves around community and the need for healthy community. And when I say healthy community, I'm talking about a community that is grace-filled, not judgment or fixing, but a grace-filled community that's safe for your child to be honest and still be accepted. I just feel that scripture shows us over and over again that we get well in community. I think one of the verses that most of us know is, right, confess one to another so that you may be healed. And there's just healing in honest community. And our children need that space to be able to be supported by others, encouraged by others, and to be able to move forward that way. I would add that as parents, though, that we also have to be aware of our own emotional health. And so where do we go for our support? Because if my child comes to me and reveals some things they're struggling or hurting with, I just find that I'm going to be flooded with emotions. Could be fear, could be grief, could be anger, whatever it is. But like, I need my own community where I can find my emotional health and stability as well, so that I can lead my child well. And also just model what it looks like to be in a healthy community. And it's in that community where I'm walking together with others. It's so vitally important for all of us. We were wired for it. We need that. And so, yeah, if your child is struggling, it's helping them find that community where they can be honest and accepted, but also managing what your own emotional health is while you're walking with your child.
Yeah, certainly that idea of community. Now, Bonnie, you get to work with people in a one-on-one context. And so maybe you could share with us a little bit about how counseling itself can benefit a child as they're trying to work through some of this emotional health.
Thanks. I want to just jump up what Jim was saying. First is for the parent to be, in touch with their own emotional health is important. And I think not to unload on your kid, but to say like, hey, I'm struggling too, kinds of things, and maybe to open up the conversation with them. So first for the parent to, try the conversation on their own and to ask the kid how they're feeling, tell them I'm feeling a little anxious now. How are you feeling? Maybe to open up the conversation. And then when the parent doesn't feel like they can fully handle it, or if the parent feels like they should notice their own limitations and be willing to, send their child off to counseling or encourage their child to go. Sometimes kids are not willing to do that. They're not wanting to do that. And I always say, just ask them to try it a couple of times, because I feel like most people after the first session are willing to go back. Counseling is non-judgmental, safe place where you can come and share whatever's on your heart. Your therapist doesn't have a stake in the game in terms of like they're not disappointed if you get bad grades, or they're not, there's no consequence. We're not going to tell you not to hang out with your friend anymore who is making a few bad choices or whatever. So it's completely non-judgmental, safe place for your teen to talk. And it's amazing how needed that is, in society right now, right? We're all distracted, we're all busy, but counseling is usually one-on-one, two people fully focused, fully engaged with no distractions. And I think that, in itself is one of the more powerful parts of counseling. So just, counseling gives them a safe place to talk.
Thanks. Hand it over to Jamie.
So as we as we hear our kids and we have them kind of experience, like we know that there's just days where they feel sad or they feel disappointed, and sometimes that's just kind of a part of life. But sometimes there's more to that. And so I wonder if you could help us better understand a little bit more about how can we tell the difference between whether our kids are just struggling with disappointment and sadness, or if there's more to it, if there's some anxiety and depression there. Kind of what is the difference between those emotions, and how can we tell? And so Sage and Bonnie, I thought maybe you guys could kind of tackle that question coming from a counselor's perspective. How do we know if our kid is just sad, disappointed, or if they're really struggling with some anxiety and depression?
That's a great question. I think spotting the difference between sadness and disappointment versus depression and anxiety in children and teens, it's tricky at any time, but I really think that it's especially tricky during times such as these, because our gauge of meter on what an expected response is to the situation at hand, it's really been thrown off from our typical way of living. And so, for instance, we're all pretty much trying to learn together what typical responses to this very atypical collective experience looks like. And so I just kind of frame it up that way, as offering to parents, have some softness towards yourself and really trying to decipher this. Some of the very specific things that we look at to determine where on the continuum of sadness versus depression, or disappointment and worry and stress versus anxiety, where a child may lie with that is that, we really look at if they're experiencing any moments of joy and relief, or they're really feeling like fully encumbered by their symptoms. We also look to see if they're experiencing perhaps any psychosomatic symptoms, so mind-body symptoms such as headaches, belly aches. We also do a thorough assessment in sessions to really see if they're feeling any instances of like worthlessness, to see if they're at risk for self-harm or suicidal ideation. We also look at the duration of symptoms. We look at whether or not their eating or sleeping has been negatively impacted. We also note whether or not there's a particular trigger for such symptoms, and if those symptoms seem to kind of pass after that trigger has passed, or if there's kind of more of a lingering effect. We also look at family history, and we gauge for items of self-blame, self-criticism, self-denial, and shame. And, with that, I would also say that I know I'm kind of
Oh, a little technical glitch there. Maybe Bonnie, you could weigh in.
She was on a roll there. She was covering some really good stuff. One of the ways I think about the differentiation between sadness and depression is, sadness is caused by usually an outward event, right? A circumstance, a failed test, a breakup, something. A lot of times I can sort of name what started it. And as Sage was saying, if it prolongs beyond, too long, I usually say a couple of weeks, it might be time to talk to someone else. For me with depression, or for the way I describe it, is depression is kind of a hum that permeates life. It's not, one thing. It's just this heavy feeling that is there all the time. So, no matter what you're doing, you might be at a birthday party, even having, in theory, it looks like everything's going well, but there's this hum of sadness in the back of your mind, no matter what you're doing. So I think, another thing to think about with depression in teens is, you can't always judge it by what's going on the outside, right? You have to have the conversations, because things can look good. Just because you're laughing with your friend doesn't mean you're not feeling depressed. So that's why the conversations are so important.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate that, the encouragement to have those conversations with our kids and our teenagers, and to try to look beyond kind of the surface. But I think that there were some great tips about how to kind of just know the difference between whether they're sad or struggling with a bit more. One of the next kind of questions that we have is, if our kids feel themselves kind of going into that struggle with depression and anxiety, they're kind of aware of that, they know that they're headed in that direction. If you had kind of a go-to list of things that they could do that would be healthy ways of just responding to those emotions, or healthy ways of being able to combat some of that. And maybe there's, kids or teens who are even listening to this recording, and they'll be able to kind of write down some of these things for their own, instead of parents kind of saying, well, why don't you do this or do that? Sometimes they kind of take advice from somebody else. But if you had kind of a go-to list of some things that would help when kids are feeling depressed or anxious, I know, Bill, we'll kind of start with you in terms of just kind of a healthy lifestyle. What would that look like that could help with some of those emotions? And then Sage, we're just talking about kind of this idea of kids who are anxious or depressed. What are some go-tos that they could do to help kind of with those emotions? So Bill, we'll go ahead and start with you, and then Sage, we can jump into that.
Yeah, I think as we get older, we develop more coping skills, but everyone's gonna kind of got their own bags of tricks that they use to keep themselves going. The biggest things are taking care of yourself, eating healthy, sleeping well, understanding how you feel. Exercise is huge too, and that can be something simple as going for a walk, riding your bike, yoga, it could be playing a sport, go outside, doing things that you enjoy, whether that's drawing, nature, laughing, singing, calling a friend, play a game, whatever you have for that. And it's important to kind of have a go-to person to get some help, maybe a trusted adult, a friend. And if you're having thoughts where, that they're not so good, changing that up by reading, writing a poem, reading the Bible, learning something new, trying to just keep a positive attitude is huge. There's a whole bunch of tricks that you kind of learn as you get older, and kind of going back to those. But the really important things are the healthy side of getting food, healthy food, sleeping well. It starts with that, I think.
Okay, great. So I apologize for that abrupt departure on my part. My power went out. So 2020, we've got a little kid's lantern here to light me up. Yeah, I had to switch over from my iPad to my phone. So sorry about that. But I think as we're really thinking about, how do we best help support children and teens during this time, particularly when they're coming to us with some of these potential symptoms, I really think that helping them to recognize when they're starting to feel some of these things, I tend to think of the 3 R's. So really recognizing, what does anxiety or stress or worry or depression look like, feel like in my body? What does it feel like in my emotions, which is really kind of that like limbic area of our brain, and how does it impact my thoughts? These are things that our kids and teens may be able to tell us, and they may not be able to tell us, or they may not notice in themselves. And so I think parents and caring adults in kids' lives can really help them to kind of recognize some of these things. And so recognizing and then relaxing. So again, coming up with and kind of identifying before they get to that point of feeling very overwhelmed, identifying what helps to bring calm to them when they need to kind of tap into that. Also helping them to understand that if they can really ground themselves when they're feeling some of that, then that helps them to bring their thinking part of their brain all the way back fully engaged. Then they're able to kind of start to, tell themselves some of what may be more true than perhaps some of the stories that they're telling themselves or tempted to believe. And when I say thinking brain, that's what I call the cerebral cortex. That's where we do all of our higher level of thinking. And then the last piece is redirecting, right? So encouraging our kids and teens to redirect their activity. If they're feeling kind of stuck, if they're working on their schoolwork and they're just like, I'm not getting it, this is feeling so hard, and I'm just kind of getting stuck in this pattern of feeling pretty lousy about myself, then perhaps they could go outside, not like what it's like outside right now, but chat with a friend, play a game, watch a movie. And another thing that I like to really encourage parents and families to be aware of is that, again, sometimes children have a very specific need in these moments, but they're not able to say what it is that they need. And so with that, I also rely on what I call the A's. And so are they in need of attention? Are they in need of appreciation? So kind of feeling recognized for what they are doing well. Do they need affection? Are they craving physical closeness, like a hug or a snuggle? Are they craving alone time? Maybe they need some separation from a sibling. Do they need acceptance to know that they're loved and lovable even when they're messing up, or even when they're having a tough moment? And or do they have a physical need? Sometimes, like, even as grown-ups, we get hangry, or maybe we're feeling pretty exhausted, and that impacts our mental and emotional well-being as well.
Thanks, guys, for just those answers. I think as a parent, those are really practical, and I feel like, okay, we can implement those things. But one of the things that is always difficult is, like, it really is managing our response. And I know for me that could be a challenge, because especially the emotional side of things, it's just hard to interpret. So I want to ask, Bill, Jim, and Bonnie, how do I respond when my child expresses anxious or depressive thoughts to me? And this is something that our parents within our community asked directly. So, how are we supposed to respond when our child expresses anxious or depressive thoughts? And then when do we need to take immediate action? And so, Bill, I'd love to go to you first, and then Jim, and then Bonnie.
As a parent, I think the best thing is not to react. Let the child speak for themselves. Let them kind of get it out there on the table, so that they're not keeping stuff inside. So not responding is huge. In a school setting, we have, I'm at a high school setting, but I was a middle school counselor too. People kind of use you when they need you, and then when they don't need you anymore, they don't show up as much, and that's okay too. So encouraging them to see a counselor at school. A lot of schools have wellness centers now too, so they have a licensed person there to chat with too. A physical person to take your physical, taking care of your physical and mental health there too. So there are some really good facilities out there, especially in the high schools, where you can just reach out to your counselor and get those information for your son or daughter.
And then Jim, how do we, how do we respond when our children say these things or express these things?
Yeah, I would say, do your best to remember the 2 L's, right? Listen and love. I mean, I know for me, it's harder at home than it is when I'm with, let's say, students at the landing. Because at home, like, as a parent, I want my initial reaction can be that of fixing, of giving advice. And hey, there's going to be time to come up with a game plan later. But first, we have to listen intently, and then we have to love, right? Whether that looks like hugging, crying together, laughing together, but we listen intently, and then we love. Because what we have to remember is our child has just taken a risk of being vulnerable and honest with us. And we have to respect that they took that risk of vulnerability. And so we listen, because, I mean, in some sense, we all deal with issues of insecurity and identity. And your child needs to know that they're accepted and loved in that moment. And our initial response when they first share something new, that moment, it matters so much. And we get to respond just the same way that Jesus responds to us when we go to him with our pain and our hurt, right? We get met with grace, and we have to remember to do that, because that moment truly will set the trajectory for the rest of the conversation and conversations to come. Because if my child comes to me and shares something that they're dealing with that's very painful for them, and I dismiss it or I try to fix it, they're going to shut that conversation down. But if I listen and love and accept them and validate them, originally they're dipping their toe in the water to see if it's safe to talk to me about this. And when they're met with that, they will share the rest. They will continue that conversation. And now there's an opportunity that I have with my child to walk with them through that. And so resisting that initial, for me, dad response to fixing this is so important. Like, I just need to listen intently and I need to love. And I would say, do your best to recall how that emotion felt for you when you were 14 or 15. Like, your kid's experience might be drastically different, but the emotion that they're expressing, the emotion they're feeling, whether it's an insecurity or not fitting in or not, being good enough or the pressure to perform, whatever the emotion is, you can relate to how that emotion made you feel when you were 14. And that should shape your response, to have empathy and compassion and an ability to listen and to love. And, oh man, if we can get that first part of the conversation right, that conversation will open up. But if we get that wrong, it'll close down.
No, thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's, I think, Bill and Jim, that's just great, really practical advice on how to be present with your kid. I think, though, at certain points, there comes that moment for immediate action. So Bonnie, if you wouldn't mind maybe speaking to that portion of the question, when do I need to take immediate action?
Okay, thanks. Well, if I think the main thing to think about is if your child talks about any kind of, suicidal, thoughts or anything, it's time to take immediate action, right? It's to take them seriously, not to assume it's, not an important conversation or that they're just kidding. That said, just because a student says something like, I wish I wasn't here, I wish I was never born, those are not necessarily suicidal type thoughts. You have to ask the questions, clarify what they mean by that. A lot of people are afraid to ask the question point blank, have you ever thought about suicide? They think somehow they're going to put the idea in the person's head. And so they really try to stay away from that. And a lot of people think that's true. Well, there's no science to support that. It's okay to ask someone if they've had the suicidal thoughts. 1 in 5 teens in America have had a suicidal thought so far this year. And so it is something we have to keep in mind and take seriously. And I think if you see that your child is depressed, don't be afraid to ask. Or if you hear it on the news, or if something happens in the school or something like that, you've got the perfect in to open the conversation, right? Did you hear about this person? What did you think, right? And sometimes it's an easier to ask your kid, or like, what are your friends saying about it, right? If they say like they didn't think too much, you can say, well, what are your friends saying about it? And then that also gives you the chance to dive in a little bit deeper, right? You can talk about the fact that, the people that tend to kill themselves or that kill themselves, may have a mood disorder or suffer from depression. It gives you an in there. There's just a lot of ways you can, try to deepen the conversation with your child. So don't be afraid to ask them. And then, the question is, have you thought about suicide? And then if they say yes, you say, well, do you have a plan? How would you do that? And if they have an answer, that elevates the concern and the alarm. Asking them how often they think about it and, when they think about it. And if the answer to these questions is yes, I think that it's time to call for professional help. And I will tell you right now, it is hard to get an appointment. So don't give up, persevere. Go to either the pediatrician if, for a more immediate response, if you can't get in with a mental health professional. And if all else fails, you go to an emergency room. Don't leave your child alone if you think that they're in any danger. Take them very seriously. Sage, do you have anything to add to that?
I would agree, taking it very seriously and, when in doubt, take it to the next step, consult with a professional. some pieces are very tricky, particularly looking at intent. You know, the difference between whether or not a child or a teen is saying, hey, I've had these thoughts, but I know that I want to act on them, versus I've had these thoughts, I'm not sure if I would act on them, you know, and that's a really, really hard part, I would say, even for us as professionals to gauge. And so I would encourage parents to not put the burden or the weight of having to determine whether or not your child's safe if they're talking about, you know, it to this extent or in this degree of detail. You want to get a professional involved, absolutely.
Hey,
Thanks.
if
Go ahead,
I
Jim.
could just interject something really quickly. So in some of the, you know, I don't have the training that these other professionals have, but in some of the training I have done that I found very helpful was that we practiced it, we role played it, we asked another person if they, because it's a very intimidating question. It doesn't feel normal the first time you say it. And so I sat in this class with a guy across the table from me, and I looked him in the eyes and I asked him that question. And you quickly become comfortable with it. You realize it's not as awkward as you think. And so I would just tell parents, like, hey, find a trusted friend, like actually say those words and practice that conversation for the time that you actually might have to ask the question real, because it was so helpful for me to actually be able to role play it once before I actually had to do it in a serious conversation. So.
Yeah, for such a difficult topic, I appreciate, you know, you all being willing to address that so head on. And I know that, at least in my own experience working with students, I've been grateful because, you know, there are resources available, you know, as these things come about and as students begin to express these things. And so I'm grateful for just the advice you guys are giving, and also for the fact that there are resources available within our community if students need to take advantage of those things. But we know that emotions are challenging. Emotions are complicated to work through. They're complicated to discern. And so I want to turn to Jim and to Sage here and just ask, you know, how do we help our children identify or communicate their emotions? Because as parents or as caring adults, we know that it can be hard to really express what we're trying to say. And so, you know, Jim, maybe we could start with you, but how do we help children and students identify and communicate their emotions?
Yeah, I would say find a tool that works for you. There are actually a lot of tools out there. Find one that works for you, one that I have used. I mean, and it sounds kind of silly, right? I'm a 52-year-old man talking about a tool for understanding my emotions, but emotions get complex, and it's helpful at any stage. And one of the things is a feeling wheel, where if you just kind of picture the center ring kind of being 6 of the more basic emotions. And one of those on the feeling wheel, in most of them, will be anger, right? Because I know when I'm feeling angry. So I go to the feeling wheel, I go to the center ring, I see anger, but then I look at that and it comes out a level, and it might say, hey, am I feeling distant? Am I feeling resentful? Am I feeling humiliated? And I'm like, oh, you know what? Yeah, more than angry, I'm feeling humiliated because of something that has happened. And now that I know that it's come out of anger and into humiliation because of a certain event that happened, now I have something to work with. It brings me to a point to go, okay, yeah, I'm feeling angry, but you know what? I'm resentful. You know, your child might be like, you might see anger, but it's resentment because, well, maybe their sibling was, you know, needed a large amount of your time, and they're feeling resentful that they haven't received that time. So moving from that inner ring to the outer ring to get to the core issues that you can actually work with is so helpful. And I would say the other thing I have is just a single sheet, one-side paper. It's got a list of almost 200 emotions. They're, you know, it's just alphabetized. It's just emotions. But what is helpful for me in that is that list is comprehensive, meaning it's all the emotions that sometimes we would categorize as positive or negative. And for me, it's so important in my health and just my emotions to get an honest and full understanding of where I am. And so rather than just kind of be self-focused on the negative, to have that list of both positive and negative, so I get a full understanding of where I am, and not get so focused in the negative that I can get stuck there. But to get an honest, full view of where I am, I find helpful as well.
Thanks, Jim. How about for you, Sage?
Yeah, that's really great. I also use an emotions wheel, both professionally and personally in my house. My girls are always kind of running over to point to their feelings. Yeah, I agree. Sometimes what we're feeling is just too complex to name without looking at something. And so I really think that this goes well beyond the fact that young children may not yet have the full verbiage to explain that all of that which they're carrying with them. Sometimes it's simply that there's not a word that quite gets at what it is that we're feeling. I mean, emotions are so expansive and so nuanced. And so I find it very powerful to offer to both children, teens, and actually adults too, some creative means and measures to talk about their feelings. And so we do a lot of therapeutic writing. Sometimes I'll give just a very simple prompt for like a teen or like a young adult, even asking what are some of the things that you'd like to invite in right now, right? Like what are your intentions? What do you want to invite more of? Do you need more self-compassion? Do you need some calm? Do you feel like you need to tap into some reassurance of self? And what is it maybe that you need to let go of? What do you want to release? And then I just have them like write for like 4 minutes, and we just see what comes out. It's kind of like a stream of consciousness. Some other non-directive activities that I'll do, particularly for like younger kiddos, when we were in person, I would always sit down with them at my little sand tray or do my dollhouse work with them. I would have them just show me a scene, like paint a scene for me in the sand tray or in the dollhouse that shows me some of what's coming up for you, what you're feeling, what have you felt over this past week. And now that we're doing all telehealth, something that I do is I have a lot of the kids that I work with will either have like Play-Doh or slime or some little like action figures or just something to be able to kind of show me and set a scene still. We do a lot of sensory work in my house. These non-directive and directive creative measures, also art therapy, it doesn't have to be in the therapeutic setting though, in order for families to take advantage of this. Sometimes just even asking your kid to draw a picture that shows how they're feeling, what's coming up for them. I think it's also super important to encourage our children to feel their emotions fully. This is not something that we always drive straight into, even as adults. I think, it's incredibly powerful for us to teach our kids that there are not bad feelings. Sure, sometimes our feelings can lead us to behave a certain way, and sometimes there are painful consequences for our actions, but that the feelings themselves, they ought to be feeling them instead of stuffing them or suppressing them. I often say, if you try to kind of hold it in one way, it may come squeaking out a different way, which, as you can imagine, becomes a little colorful in our example when I'm working with like young boys and such. So we laugh about it a little bit, but that's what happens with our feelings too. And so one way that we can kind of model this for our kids is to share, man, I woke up just feeling kind of blah today. I don't really know what I'm feeling, but I do know that I'm missing grandpa, right? So just kind of sharing with them that it's also okay to share how we're feeling, even if we haven't landed on the word yet. And then some other things that I would recommend, particularly for teens, we really want to help them to kind of begin to develop some of the framework that we are hoping to set for them as parents and caring adults in their lives. So just as we aim to communicate with our children that we really appreciate that they're bringing these things to us, we can also aim to instill within them some self-pride for having gotten in touch with their own feelings. So for example, we may encourage them to try on like, wow, that was really hard for me to name my feeling, but I did it. I'm proud of myself. Just as we aim to offer validation to that which our children are feeling, we can encourage them to also offer that validation to themselves, perhaps trying something on like, what I'm experiencing is difficult. I'm brave for thinking about it, feeling around it, for talking about it. And then just as we aim to offer empathy to our kids, we can also instill in them the desire to offer empathy to themselves. You know, a lot of times I'll ask, particularly my older kiddos and teens, you know, I hear you saying a lot of unkind stuff about yourself. Is that something that you would ever say to a friend? And I have them actually kind of try on imagining saying it out loud to a friend. And so often they're like, no, my friend would never be my friend again. And then we kind of talk about the fact that, wow, and like even your friends that you're with the most, we're not with them a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, but you are with you all the time. And so if the inner dialogue that you're having with yourself is kind of that of a bully that you can't get away from, you know, maybe that's an area that we can aim to do some work on, or as parents, we can really aim to help our kids get in touch with what is their inner critic kind of sounding like, and can we help them to have greater empathy and self-compassion towards themselves, trying on, man, it's understandable that I'm feeling this way. I know I'm not alone in my feelings. And then the last piece, you know, just as we offer, we try to remind ourselves that as we offer our children the opportunity to collaborate in the process of identifying potential solutions, in softening toward themselves and reaching towards resolution of their emotions, we are inviting them into the process of healing. And so just continuing to talk to them about that, and you know, I definitely nerd out over emotions, but I think we can get our kids excited about it too if they can kind of see why we're doing this, why we're encouraging them to talk about it. You know, it's the whole name it to tame it, feel it to heal it thing.
Thanks, guys, for sharing that.
Yeah, I think that's really great. I love the idea that emotions are not then something we have to be afraid of either, and that we encourage the healthy response of that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate those practical tips of navigating emotions. I thought we could just close hearing just a little bit from each of you as well. Just some final words of encouragement to parents during this season. How might you encourage parents right now with everything that we're going through in the moment? Jim, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go with Bill, and then Bonnie, and then Sage.
Yeah, I would say, again, for me, community, like find your safe, honest community for your child and for you. And the good news is that there are many of those communities available where we live, and there's many of those communities right here at Willowdale Chapel, whether for you it's in your small group, whether it's at MOPS, whether it's at Reengage or Celebrate Recovery. Just, you know, I'm the Celebrate Recovery Ministry lead, shameless plug. That's exactly what Celebrate Recovery aims to do, is create safe environments for people to be able to be honest and to step into that space. So find that community, not just for your child, but for you. And just remember, God has equipped you and given you everything you need for this season. You have turned to Jesus with your own hurts and pains, and you've been met by grace and love, and so you have the model to know how to respond well and to walk with your children. And I would say walking with your children through the hard is a big thing, at least the way I think about it. Like, I want to walk with my children through the hard things, and help them navigate it, where they can find hope and hopefully find Jesus in the middle of that hard, because this isn't going to be the last hard season. There's going to be other hard seasons, and knowing that they know how to navigate that and journey that later in life when another hard season may come, and find hope in Jesus in the middle of that mess, is to me, that's the beautiful picture that I want to get to, because authority is fleeting. My children are going to reach an age where I don't have authority, but if I walk with them through the mess, I'll have influence, and influence is powerful and lasting. And so walk with your children, and mom and dad, you can do this. You can do this because God has equipped you. You have the model of grace and love, and you have community. We don't do this alone. We do this in community. And so I would encourage you with that, with community, and with walking with your children with the same grace and love that Jesus walks with us.
Yeah, I agree with what Jim just said. It's so important to find that community. My best tip would be for parents and kids is to find some things that they really enjoy to do together. Whether that's cooking, watching a movie, just some kind of positive time where the world can kind of just stop where it is, and you guys can have that kind of positive moment. I know so many kids are on their Zoom calls, and parents are our teachers, they're meal providers, they're everything these days, and just finding something positive that they both enjoy is huge, and they can just spend some quality time together.
Oh, sorry. Am I on?
No, we have you there.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're okay.
Leave it to the old person. All right. I just wanted to say, to the parents out there, we can do everything right. We can love our children well, but sometimes we do need to add a professional into the mix, right? We don't try to clean our children's teeth for them, right? Like, it's okay to seek professional help if you need it. So just doesn't mean that necessarily a reflection on you as a parent that you've done anything wrong. It's the first thing I would say. I just wanted to circle back to two other thoughts. When you're helping your children to calm down, or if they're having anxiety issues, there's some really great apps out there that you might consider. There's the Calm app, there's the Abide app, there's a lot of great stuff on YouTube where you can put on these relaxation videos and help to settle yourself down. They can be really, really helpful if somebody's feeling really anxious. So just to be aware of those. And then the third thing is, when you're having some of these harder conversations with your kids or your teens, don't be afraid to come back to it later, right? You'll walk away and you'll be like, oh, I wish I said this, or oh, I shouldn't have said that. Don't be afraid to circle back later that night or the next day and say, yesterday you said this, and I was thinking about it, and now I'd like to talk, like to dive in deeper. I think a lot of times we think we've had the conversations and, either we've forgotten to say things or we've said them wrong. Don't be afraid to circle back. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I think it can be really valuable once you've thought about it to go back and bring up a subject again. So the other thought.
I love all of those thoughts. I think that's all so great. What I would really share with family, you're doing a beautiful job. This is really difficult. Parenting is never easy. And right now, this is hard for all of us, and we're all carrying our own stressors. And so, and now attempting to carry and hold full space for those of our children too. So be gracious with yourself. There are going to be days when you get so much right, and then there are also going to be days in which you feel like you've completely failed yourself and your kids. And just remind yourself of what's more true than that. You're not a failure. You are a human. And one thing that I wanted to share, since we are all going through it collectively, and I know that everybody's experience of of it does look different, but something that I've found helpful is writing, words of affirmation for myself. And so one that I recently wrote for myself when I was having just like a very off homeschooling day with my girls was, I choose to slather the grace and self-compassion on heavily, as what I am doing is not easy. So too, I will hold myself accountable to learning from my mistakes, identifying what's not working well, and taking necessary steps to embody greater levels of patience, kindness, and gentleness with myself and the ones I love. Just jotting down a few words or phrases. It doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be super detailed. Sometimes just even a simple word that you want to remember to help kind of anchor you through and get you through the next day or even the next hour. And then another thing that I would add is give yourself permission to also talk to someone, and go after your own healing if you feel that you need it. I really truly believe that it's one of the most powerful gifts that we can offer our children is our own healing. And this is a continual process. And so For some, the continual work of healing may look like continually drawing closer to not only thinking, but also feeling about themselves in the way that God thinks and feels about them as a beloved child, and creating and sustaining the time and space to continually work our own healing and do the work of our own heart repair can be incredibly transformational, not just for ourselves, but also for our kids.
Thanks, guys, for sharing all of that. It's like I have so many different things going through my head right now, but at the base of all, I feel really comforted. So I'm grateful for all the insight you guys have brought to the table, for all just the different practical pieces of advice you've offered to us. But it's great to know that you're all within our community, and we know that these conversations are ongoing. This is not a one and done thing. So I'm glad that we know that we can find any of you and continue these conversations. So thank you again for being part of this. Sage, you get the award for the most innovative Zoom panelist ever for using a child's flashlight for your lighting right now as your power. Oh, unbelievable. But thank you all just for bringing your heart and your mind to this and for sharing such great stuff with us. Allow me to pray for us and I'll wrap it up. So God, we thank you because you care about us. Our heart means so much to you, and you want to walk with us through the challenges of life, and you want to lead us into your peace. And so God, thank you for your creative work to create structures in this world that help us discover your peace. But thank you also for your promise to be with us in those difficult moments. Thank you because you don't abandon us. You don't give up on us, and you're not ashamed of us for feeling like life is difficult. But in fact, you double down on grace and you're with us. So thank you, God. I ask that you would just use this conversation here to help build healthier homes, healthier relationships between students, children, and adults and parents. And God, I just ask that in all this, we would understand your love for us even more. So thank you for our guests this evening, and would you bless them as well. I pray this all in your name, Christ. Amen. Well, thank you guys for being part of this Navigating the Next Generation event, and we're just so grateful for your time.